Don, what were your influences? You grew up in Gainesville, right? So tell me, Stephen Stills and Petty, and what other rock stories from the center of Florida there?
Well, Gainesville turned out to be an unusual place where a lot of people came out of there that went on to be platinum-selling Rock and Roll Hall of Fame artists. For some reason, I don't know if it was something that was in the water or something that we were all smoking at the time. I think it was the latter. Anyway, I grew up there. By the time I was 14, I put together this little band called the Continentals with a guy named Stephen Stills. My mom would drive us around from gig to gig to gig because we didn't have a car or driver's license at the time. Stephen finally graduated from high school and moved to California, and within a month or so, this other guy showed up in town named Bernie Leadon, who turned out to be one of the founding members of the Eagles. He replaced Stephen in the Continentals, and we played together for about 3 years before the Eagles even existed. When I was 16, I got a job working in the music store there, Lipham Music in Gainesville, teaching guitar. And one day, this kind of scrawny, buck-toothed, blonde-headed kid walked in and wanted to take guitar lessons. His name was Tommy Petty. So I wound up teaching Tom Petty for about a year and helping him with his first band called the Epics. He had 2 guitar players that would just plug in and turn up and thrash aimlessly. They didn't know what they were doing. He was playing bass and singing, so I kind of worked with them and told one guy to play rhythm, the other guy not to play when Tom was singing. When he left a hole, you can play. So anyway, just kind of helped him sort that out. And Tom had an amazing charisma on stage. Even when he was 14, 15, 16 years old, he was just captivating. He had such a conviction that he sold everybody in the room on what he was doing. Now, he used to sing and whine kind of like Bob Dylan. It's always a little bit out of tune. And I remember standing next to a bunch of really cute girls watching Tom Petty sing, and they went, "Oh, my God, he's so great." And I went like, "Do you realize he's singing out of tune?" It didn't matter. Anyway, he was just captivating. One of the other people that lived there, 2 of the other people that lived in Daytona Beach were the Allman Brothers, Greg and Dwayne. We were in battles of the bands together every year, and I have the distinct honor of having lost 3 battles of the bands to the Allman
Really?
Brothers. We became really good friends. I remember sitting on the floor of their mom's house in Daytona Beach, and Dwayne playing slide guitar, and I said, "What is that? How do you do that?" I'd seen a bunch of old black blues artists play slide acoustic, but I'd never seen anybody play electric slide guitar like Dwayne. I said, "You got to show me how to do that." So I talked Dwayne into teaching me my first slide guitar lessons. So Gainesville turned out to be just a unique place that produced an amazing amount of talent that went on to have stellar careers. I remember I did an interview with me and Smokey Robinson, who came out of Motown, where all those fantastic artists came out of just one little area up there. And it was a similar type thing where, I don't know, some laser from somewhere up in the sky that came down and zapped these 2 places.
Do you ever sneak back to Gainesville?
Yeah, my brother still lives there with his wife in the same house he bought when he graduated from college 50 years ago. And it's really fun to go back and see what's happened to the town, because it's grown from what used to be called Hogtown Creek into this huge university town. Sure. And they have nuclear research centers there and medical centers, and it's just a phenomenon what's happened to that town since I lived there on the little dirt road in a white clapboard house with a tin roof where I grew
Drive
up.
by the old house sometimes?
Yeah, I do up in by. It's still standing. It's kind of a miracle, because down there everything rots and mildews in a matter of years, but it's still standing.
All right. Todd, you're, of course, a man of many talents, producer, singer, songwriter. You've invented styles of music that nobody had done before. What would you say is your best skill, and which do you like using the most?
Oh, quite obviously, it's my people skills. Part of being a polyglot, I didn't know that's what I was, but somebody essentially dubbed me a polyglot, which is, I don't know what the glot part means, but the poly means, you do many different things. And for me, it's probably a product of brain disorder. But having the ability to go from one thing to another thing or being able to do multiple things at once just sort of fits with the way that my brain works. I get easily bored with things, and I am also very sometimes process oriented. I want to know how things work, what goes into the construction of a building, and therefore what goes into the construction of a song or a hit song or anything like that. You study it, you try to understand why it has the effect that it has, and and that has just, you know, sort of naturally led me through these things. I started out as I thought I was going to be in a rock band. That band lasted for about 18 months, and after that experience, I didn't want to be a rock star anymore. Just having a face full of the reality of being in the music business changed my mind in some way, but I still was very much into writing music and making records, so I didn't want any of the politics and stuff like that. I just wanted to focus on the music, and I accidentally backed into a career as an artist because I was producing other people, I was engineering other records, I was doing the band Stage Fright and Jesse Winchester and Hall & Oates and Grand Funk Railroad and all that other stuff. But I was still writing, and I wanted to do a vanity project, and I talked my label into it, put the thing out with no expectation that anything would ever happen with it, and I accidentally had a hit single. And at that point on, I suddenly had two careers. I only really wanted one. I only wanted to make records. Suddenly, I had a public image, and I had to figure out how to deal with that. And then the other stuff was maybe lifelong interests that I had. I was always interested in computers and robots and things like that because I wanted to build a robot pal that would protect me from all the bullies in the neighborhood. And that led me to learn about computers before anybody really kind of knew what they were for or what they did, and the number systems that went with them. So I was a producer and I was an artist, and then suddenly I became a computer programmer, you know. Then I was also interested in video. So when I got a bunch of money from a Meatloaf record I did, I bought a bunch of video equipment, and I got into video just because I wanted to understand how these things were made and take control over the process so I wouldn't have to turn my creativity over to somebody else. And that's the only reason why I do all these things is I'm a control freak in some sense. But also I'm very curious about how these things work. You know?
How do you have time for all of those? Do you put one on the back burner for a while, or do you just kind of like
for me, the world is moving very slowly.
That's right.
You know, my brain is, you know, so it's plenty of time as far as I'm concerned. You know, I'm wasting time half the time. So.
Wow. Edgar Winter, last night the Edgar Winter Band was just insane. Your first visit here, late night, by the pool. That guitar back and forth that you did with your band member was spectacular, and you did it with. Obviously, you appreciate your band, and they back you up quite well. But as I mentioned, you invented the strap-over keyboard. Was that something just out of necessity, so you could walk around? And did you patent it?
It was unpatentable, unfortunately, if that is a word. But it was just out of frustration. I started out, you know, playing, well, actually, ukulele was the first thing. Grew up playing with my brother Johnny, and he and I, of course. I never had any desire to be famous. I think were it not for Johnny, I probably would have been a struggling jazz guy. Who knows? We grew up playing together, and that's where all of that vocal, guitar, column, response stuff originated. Since we grew up playing together, we had a sort of an almost telepathic communication, knew each other's licks, and we used to do Tobacco Road when I first came up to New York and played with his band. Johnny was always, he had the ambition and the drive. He had the dream, you know. He watched Bandstand and read all the magazines. He was Johnny Cool Daddy Winter with the shades and the guitar. And I was the weird kid that played all the instruments. So my dad played guitar and banjo, and he showed us our first chords on ukuleles. My mother played beautiful classical piano. My grandfather played fiddle, violin. My great-grandfather played trumpet. Everybody in our family was musical, and I just thought it was a normal thing. I didn't realize until we started trying to put together bands with our friends around the neighborhood. Yeah, what, your daddy didn't show you no chords or nothing? What's going on? It's just like everybody doesn't do this. It was just like a family, sort of a family tradition, and something that we all did. But after Woodstock was really the turning point in my career. Up to that point, I just really. I didn't consider myself a singer, and I was really just an instrumentalist. But that whole thing set against the social backdrop of civil rights and the peace movement, and seeing people that were writing and singing songs that they really believed in, it was just something that I had never experienced. Up to that point, music had been sort of my own little private escape world as a kid growing up, and gave me a sense of identity. It was something I could do. But when I saw all of those people brought together and united in that way, it made me realize that music was so much more, that it really had the power to reach out to people. And that's when I thought, well, maybe I'll think about writing songs, becoming an artist. And Johnny's manager introduced me to Clive Davis, who was the president of CBS at the time. As they say, the rest is history. And the strap-on, which I never really got around to answering the question. But
that's okay. We have that extra hour tonight.
I just, as I was so frustrated being stuck behind a big bank of keyboards, and said, why do the guitar players get to have all the fun? Oh, get out there and boogie, So
sure. It
was just a simple, obvious idea, and no one had thought of it. And when synthesizers came out, there was the ARP 2600, which had a remote keyboard. And when I was walking through the music store, I saw it. It says, oh, wow, that's cool. It looks like you could just put a strap on that, which I proceeded to do, and there you have it.
Fantastic. Ah! Well, if you need any work done on either of those keyboards, let me introduce you to Todd Rundgren over here. How much did you get paid for your first gig, and what was your first gig, professional gig?
You talking to me?
Yeah. Thank you, De Niro. Yes.
I don't recall getting paid for it. I started playing in high school. I had a high school band, and we had, I guess, what you would call legitimate gigs. So they were mostly like we would go and crash somebody's dance somewhere. They would have junior high school and high school dances on the weekends at mostly school, and we'd hear of one, and then we would essentially show up uninvited, and say, we're a live band, can we play? And most of the time they would not let us play, but every once in a while they said, what the hell? Because it wasn't like it is now. My rhythm guitar player, the other guy in the band, who was my best friend since like elementary school, his parents doted on him, and he could do anything he wanted. So he took their big 18-speaker stereo system and dismantled it and put it into a big rolling box, took all the speakers out and then remounted them and the amplifier and everything, and got a mixer from Radio Shack or something like that, and the entire band would go through this contraption. So all we had to do was roll that thing onto the stage, and voices, guitars, bass, everything went through that one box. All we had to do was set up a couple of drums and we would roll on stage. But most of the time, we would never get paid for that. It was just we were hoping to get exposed and occasionally laid. And
that you have to pay for.
Well, no, my friend. All you have to do is find a dance at a Catholic high school. Right? But I think we actually did get paid before I graduated from high school for a real gig. Somehow, some fraternity in downtown Philadelphia found out that, there was this band they could get for almost nothing, and we played a gig for a fraternity party and actually made some money. And I don't know, maybe $20. In those days, that was real money.
Don, what was your first paid gig, and do you remember a little bit about it?
Yeah, I used to play this gig called Teen Time, and I think it was up till like 14 or 15 years old, and our band played there just about every Friday or Saturday night. And I think we got paid, like you said, about $20 for the whole gig. We did 5 sets, so you were on stage all night long for $20.
Was this the band with Stephen Stills, or?
This was the band called Continentals before Stephen joined it. Yeah, we were like 14 or something, right about 14.
And John, before the Moody Blues, you were playing, and were you same kind of thing? And you mentioned your early influences of American rock and roll, which I guess you were filtering over to England at the time.
Ray Thomas and I met Ray when I was 14, 15, and we formed a band together. He used to sing in the church hall on a Thursday evening at the youth club, and we formed this band and we called ourselves Al Riot and the Rebels. Beautiful name. We wore Mexican outfits, and we had 6-foot sombreros.
Wow, really?
We really did. And there was a jazz club near where we lived in Birmingham, and there used to get about 100 people there every night at this jazz club. And my father went there and said, do you know, my son's got a band. They'll come and play in the interval for nothing. That was big money in those days, nothing.
At least you didn't have to pay for it.
So we played 20 minutes in the interval, and that's all the songs we knew, 20 minutes. And then they invited us back the next week. And the week after, the promoter said, this jazz thing, I think we'll have another day and have a rock and roll night. And so we started, and for anybody from Birmingham would know the pub. It's called the Tyburn House in Birmingham, and it became one of the meccas for all the Birmingham bands to play for many years after that.
Fantastic. And then how did you get into the Moody Blues of '66, right? And right around the same time as John.
Well, Ray and I had this band for about 4 years. And in that time, Mike Pinder actually came and played keyboards as well for some of that time. And then they were going down to London wanting to become professional. In other words, not to get up of a morning. I think that was... And they said, Johnny, I said, I've got another year to go at college. And I wanted to be a car designer as well when I was... Birmingham is the second motor city, and we made all the great cars from England, Jaguar, Range Rover, Austin. And I wanted to be a car designer since I was 7. So I was at college doing engineering as well as playing overnight. And I said, well, I've still got a year to go, so I'm staying in staying in Birmingham. And then, the Moody Blues released Go Now, which is a massive song. And then Ray rang me and said, hey, John, have you finished college yet? And I said, yeah. He said, oh, get down to London. And that's what I did. I went down to London in 1966, and, well, that's it, really.
Really changed the sound of the band. Everybody, and deservedly so, always cites the Beatles as having the first concept album. John Lennon may not have agreed with it, but when you examine it really, and a real concept album, Days of Future Past, which came out of the same year, really is. I mean, it's set up with the morning and Tuesday afternoon and all the way through. And I just want you to take us through a little bit of the evolution of that album. I mean, for me personally, it is. For me, it's the first concept album. From
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
The record company, we were with the Decca Record Company, and they had a software, as it's called now, which is the records, but they also had hardware, which in England they're called radiograms. I think you call them consoles in America. And they wanted to make an album in full frequency sound, which became stereo. And they thought it'd be a great idea to put, as they said in England, a pop band with an orchestra and try and show how rock and roll and symphonic music could relate. And they gave us this idea of using the New World Symphony. And then they asked us to take the tunes from New World Symphony and write some songs with those melodies. And we spoke to Peter Knight, who was the orchestra leader of the London Festival Orchestra, and he came to see us at a concert and said, do you know, why don't we just make this album with your songs and leave New World Dvorak to his own album? And that's what we did. Went into the studio. We got a lockout, which you couldn't do in those days. It meant we could have the studio 24 hours a day. We went in the studio, and it was 2 4-track studios for everybody who's interested. All we had was 2 4-track machines, and in 7 days, we made the album Days of Future Past.
Wow, in 7 days. Wow. You know, for a lot of people, what sticks out on that album, besides the creativity and the production, is the lament. So, and that was Graham that wrote that, right?
Yeah, Graham Edge.
Yeah. So I remember somebody had asked him, and he, Cold Hearted Orb, he said he was actually watching the moon rise or something. What do you remember about that? And was it difficult to convince the band to put that into the song?
When we were coming towards the end of the album, we realized we needed something to put the album together to make it cohesive. And Graham was a great poet laureate, and he's got a great way with words. And we said, Graham, you know, you should write something that holds this whole album together. Listen to all the lyrics that we've done. And I remember the first thing he came up with, breathe deep the gathering gloom. And it was just amazing. It was just absolutely perfect for the album. And yeah, it's a piece of poetic rock and roll.
Fantastic. Awesome. Don, when did you join the Eagles? And what was that like, you know, getting invited to be in the band? They were so early in their hit years. They'd only had a couple of hits.
Yeah, like I said, Bernie Ledden and I had a band in high school for about 3 years, and he finally moved back to California. I moved to New York and then up to Boston, and he kept calling me and saying, you got to move to California. The music business is out here in L.A. It's not in New York. It's not in Boston. Move out. So I took all the money I could scrape together, which was about $300, and put everything I owned in the back of a U-Haul trailer and hooked it up to this old Volvo and drove from Boston to California. The day I arrived there, the one guy I knew west of the Rockies, who was Bernie, had just left to go on tour. So I wound up getting a job with Crosby Nash, ironically enough, playing Stephen Stills' parts from when we were 14 and 15 years old. Stephen was out doing a solo record, so I had known the guys in the Eagles and had met them backstage a lot, jammed with them at sound checks and stuff along the way. So finally I got a call from, I think their producer, Bill Simzik, and he's the only guy I know whose last name has no vowels. It's all Y-Z-C-M-K. So he asked me to come down to play slide guitar on one of the Eagles songs called Good Day in Hell. So thank Dwayne Allman for teaching me how to play slide. I went in with my guitar and a little amp and my little pedal board and set it up myself. And we sat there for about 45 minutes and tracked about 5 or 6 takes on this one song called Good Day in Hell. And we got a great take, top to bottom, no editing, no Pro Tools, no nothing, actually live people playing and singing. You know what there was before Pro Tools? Just pros that could actually play and sing.
There you go.
like these guys. So anyway, I went in and played that session, went home. The next day I got a phone call from Glenn Fry asking me to join the band. And I had heard so much from Bernie about the turbulence in that band and the
It's not true.
discord and all of that stuff that was going on. My wife was pregnant, about to explode with our first child, and I had a really good paying job with Crosby Nash. So I told Glenn, yeah, love to join the band. So I called up Graham and said, I need to talk to you, because I was supposed to go out on tour with them. And I went to Graham and said, what do I do? I'm about to have my baby. I'm making $1,500 a week in 1974, which was a lot of money to go out and play with those guys, or do I join this band that could break up in an hour? So he said, no, you need to go join that band. You don't want to be a sideman for the rest of your life. So I took Graham's suggestion and went and joined the band, walked into the studio, and sure enough, it looked like they were going to break up in the next hour. But we went on to make some great records and have a great time together after all was said and done.
Yeah, fantastic. And we're going to talk about that in a minute too as well. But Todd, you have so many things going through your head as you've confessed this morning. What is your songwriting process, and how do you pick those spinning pieces of debris out and make a song out of them?
Good question.
Thank you.
I used to write, I view my oeuvre in sort of, being certain sort of distinct phases that reflect what's happened to me in my life. As I mentioned earlier, I didn't set out to be a solo artist or anything like that. I was not crazy about the politics of being in the music business. I just wanted to make records. But when I started getting seriously into writing my own stuff, I did what everybody else did, is, you sort of imitate your influences. The things that you like the most, you want to try to reproduce if you possibly can, and that's how you start out. So it was like my third record. It was called Something Anything, and it had... Please, I'm only just starting here. And it had some hit singles on it, and actually I wrote a song that I intended to be a single, the very first song, I Saw the Light. I sat down and wrote it in 20 minutes. 20 minutes top to bottom, every bit of it, and that's not a lie. But if you deconstruct the song, you realize, God, why did it take you 20 minutes? It's so Moon, June, Spoon, it's like... So after I was done that record, the combination of that kind of mimetic songwriting, I was just, sit down and write a song in 20 minutes. And then the fact that other people were referring to me as a male Carole King started to bother me a lot, because obviously I was a Carole King fan, but also, I didn't want to be compared to other people. So at that point, I had the realization that I'm different from other artists in that I don't depend on the success of my own records to survive in this business. I'm producing other people and making a great living at it. So why am I so possessed, or why do I think that I'm possessed with trying to have successful commercial records of my own? I've got access to the studio. I can do anything I want. I'm going to do something that no one else would do. And that became my purpose in the music business, to do the things that other people would not do. And that's essentially been my my standard since then. And it doesn't mean that I don't weave in and out of the blatantly commercial and then veer off into the blatantly non-commercial. There's no difference to me. It's just like, it's time to make some music. Write about yourself. That was the thing that I eventually came to realize, that I don't find inspiration in things outside of myself. I succeed best when I use writing as a process to objectivize my own thoughts and figure out whether I'm fooling myself or not. A lot of people don't have that opportunity to take the thoughts that they have, objectivize them in some way, and then be able to say, whoa, that came out of my head. I'm glad or I'm depressed that came out of my own head, you know? And therefore, I can say, oh, well, I never want to do that again, or I should not think that anymore. And that, for me, is the process of making music, talking to myself, and you get to overhear it.
It's great. Edgar, can you tell us about writing Frankenstein? Because to have an instrumental hit to be a #1 song, I mean, it was occasionally happening, but that's pretty brave, and we want to know what was going on when you wrote that.
It's such a long story.
Let me get comfortable.
Yeah.
That looks just like Carole King. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh, wait a minute. Just a little anecdote before you tell the very long story.
I'm not going to make it long.
I heard Frankenstein before any of the rest of the world heard it, because me and Rick Derringer lived on the same street in New York City. And we went through a little phase where we were taking some psychedelic drugs together, you know. And I remember I got really high on something. You know, it's not like you could get it from a dispensary. You never knew what it was. But I was really high on something, you know, and we went down to Rick's house, and Rick said, we just finished this new record. You know, you got to come in and listen to it. And I was high as a kite, and then Frankenstein comes on. Okay. Anyway, and this was just, they had just finished the record. Nobody... Maybe the label had heard the record, but you just finished the record, and because it was so different from what you had done before, was a revelation for me. You know, you teaming up with Dan Hartman essentially was a seminal moment, because Dan was such a terrific singer and songwriter, and that album, I knew when I heard it, I said, this is a new phase for Edgar Winter when I heard that record.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice.
So many odd tie-ins here. Bill Sinzik, the engineer that Don was talking about, was the engineer of the album They Only Come Out at Night. He did Frankenstein, and we were listening to some of the Eagles things that he was mixing at the same time. We did that record. But to answer the question about Frankenstein, I wrote it years before. When I first started playing with Johnny, Johnny had invited me up to New York to play on his first few records, and he had a band house out upstate New York in Rhinebeck, and he said, well, why don't you come on and play? So he would do the first part of the set with his blues trio and say, now I'm going to bring on my little brother Edgar. And nobody even knew he had a brother. I said, oh, there's two of them. So I came up with the riff as a sort of a walk-on. I just thought something bluesy and so that the blues trio, they were pretty simple, and it just sort of turned into a song, and I played Hammond B3 on it, played alto sax, and then we had two sets of drums on. So now I did a dual drum solo with Johnny's drummer, Red Turner. So it was really just, we used to call it the double drum song because of the drums. And this was like, 68, 69. Long before Frankenstein was 73. And we played different versions of it and promptly forgot about it. And then with the advent of the synthesizer, and I had gotten the idea of putting the strap on the keyboard, and I was looking for a song to feature the synthesizer, a vehicle for the synth. I said, about that old double drum song, I'll bet that riff would sound it would sound really cool with that subsonic synth bottom. we never had any intention of recording it. We just worked it up as a live song. And I'll never forget the first night I walked on stage was one of those real rock and roll moments. I walked out with the keyboard. People went crazy. And I said, hey, I think I'm onto something here. So we kept playing the song, and then when we recorded the album, we never had any intention of recording it. But back in those days, you would actually go into the studio with 3 or 4 songs and create an album, bounce ideas back and forth. And the cardinal rule was tape is always rolling. So we would come in, and it was just a fun song. We'd warm up, we'd play that. So we happened to have like 2 or 3 versions of it, like long 20-minute versions. And Rick came up with the idea. He said, well, maybe we could edit that into something usable somehow. And I said, well, that's a crazy idea, but I love crazy ideas. So it was a good excuse to get even more blasted than usual and have a big end of the session editing party. And back in those days, the only way to edit something was to physically cut the master tape and splice it back together. And it was like cutting a diamond. If you messed it up, it was gone, because you'd run a safety, but you'd lose a generation. So anyway, it had like 30 edits in it, and was lying all over the control room in pieces draped over the backs of chairs and over the console. And we were trying to figure out how to put it back together. And Chuck Ruff, the drummer, mumbled the immortal words, "Wow, man, it's like Frankenstein." Drawing the analogy of an arm here and a leg there and pasting the thing together. So the monster was born.
Fantastic. Fantastic story, thank you. Speaking of the birth of monsters, Don, please take us through Hotel California, the birth of the song. Not you. I mean, that song conjures up images and times and feelings. And can you take us through your coming up with that?
Yeah, I was living in a rented beach house in Malibu, California, and my 2 little kids. I had a daughter that was not quite a year old, and in her bedroom, I had set up this reel-to-reel 4-track TAC tape recorder. And when she was awake, I would go back in and make these little demos of song ideas. And one day I was sitting on the couch. It was just a spectacular July, Southern California, sparkling Pacific day at the beach. My kids were out playing in the sand. I was sitting on the couch playing this guitar, and out came that progression. And I played it 4 or 5 times, and I realized that I have to go record some of this. It's much like a dream. When you get an idea, if you don't record a little bit of it or write lyrics down or something, a day or 2 later, I can't quite remember exactly what it was. So I'd run back in this back bedroom and turn on the tape recorder with an acoustic guitar and played that progression, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. Then I shut it off and went out and played with my kids on a swing set in the sand of the beach. And later, when we were assembling song ideas for what was going to become the Hotel California, I went back and started listening to these dumbos, I like to call them, which are like stupid ideas that some of them work and some of them don't. And I heard that progression. I went, I'm going to finish this. And I got this little drum machine called a Roland Rhythm Ace. And you used to see them on jazz guys' pianos in clubs and bars, and they would play the cha-cha and the waltz and all these things. So I set it to a cha-cha and adjusted the tempo and sat there and tracked that, me playing acoustic guitar to that drum machine, and then I wrote a bass part to it. And Joe Walsh had just joined the band before this record, and Joe and I had been playing together in this band called Joe Walsh and Friends. I think we even did a couple of live shows that were on Don Kirshner's rock concert in those days.
That, yeah.
We just loved playing together, and just so challenging to go toe-to-toe with somebody of that caliber, and we just had a ball doing it. So I wanted to write a song that we could do that on a record on an Eagles album. So I went in and started doing these demos for that song, and played like the reggae part on it, and played solo part that's kind of something like I would play, and Joe would play something kind of like this, and just made a thumbnail sketch of it. I finished that, and I think 15 or 16 other song ideas, put them all on a cassette, if anybody remembers what a cassette is. And I gave copies of that cassette to Don Henley, Glenn Frey, Joe, and Randy Meisner, who was playing bass in the band at the time. And I said, if there's anything on this thing that you guys like, you want to finish writing with me, let's talk about it. Now, I was told by Bernie when I joined the band, if you want to write songs with Don Henley and Glenn Frey, don't write lyrics and don't write melody. Leave just music tracks for them to do what they do best on. So I got a call from Don Henley, or it was either right after I gave him that tape or at a rehearsal within a few days, and he said, I really like that song that sounds like a Mexican reggae. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And I said, great, well, let's finish writing this. And Don and Glenn went off into their lyric cave, like they so used to do, and came up with this idea of Hotel California. Now, everybody in the world has concepts of California. You see palm trees and sandy beaches, bikinis, the Beach Boys, the stars on Hollywood Boulevard, the glitz, the glamour, all of that stuff. So just the capturing of that concept in that song just seemed to reach millions of people. But the fact that we were writing it from the perspective of what it was like when we actually arrived in California, because nobody in the band was from California, believe it or not, we became one of the California sounds, to tell you the truth. And I was from Florida, I think Henley was from Texas, Glenn was from Detroit, Walsh was from Ohio, Randy Meisner was from Nebraska, but we were entitled the California sound at the time. Anyway, Don and Glenn wanted to record that track. So we went in the studio, and I'd written it on acoustic guitar in E minor, which is this big, open, kind of full-sounding acoustic key for guitar and easy to play solos in. So we went in and recorded the whole thing for 6.5 minutes worth of song. But I had never heard a melody, and I had never heard a lyric. So then Don Henley went out and set up a microphone to sing it, and it was in the totally wrong key. He sounded like Barry Gibb going, "On a dark desert highway." So I had to take a guitar, go out in the studio and move it down to D, and then I moved it down to C. It was still too high. I moved it down to A minor. It was too low, and we wound up recording it in B minor, which is not a very fun guitar key to play in. Retracked the whole thing once, top to bottom, in the right key, but it just didn't feel right. So we went back in and recorded the whole song again in the proper key. And you were talking about all the editing for Frankenstein. Before there were Pro Tools, there were pros, but pros had ways of cheating. And we would record a song, 12, 15 takes, and then we'd find the absolute best fill that led into a chorus, and we would go snip out that part of the master and glue it in. And the sides of the walls of the control room had all these pieces of tape that had little white grease pencil marks on it of where they came from and what take and where in the song it was, so you could reassemble it later, right? Anyway, the guy that was doing all that editing and literally cutting this tape with a razor blade, he used to call lopping it. When you were to cut something, you would just lop it with this razor blade. And he was just brilliant at doing it. So we nicknamed him the Big Lopper, because he would just cut all this tape and glue it back together. So when those masters went by, there were so many edits that you could actually hear him go through the tape machine. And occasionally, if we'd worked on something a lot, he would actually have to pull the white tape holding the tape together apart and re-glue them back together because they would just slowly pull apart. Anyway, so we went in and recorded that song. Joe and I sat down to do the guitar solos, and I always envisioned Joe and I just sitting there plugging in with two guitars in the control room and doing what we always did, just going at each other. And I play a line, and he play a line, and I play a line. So it got to the point where we were doing that, and Don Henley walked back in the control room, and he said, what are you doing? Stop. That's not right. And I went, what do you mean that's not right? He said, well, that's not like the demo. I said, well, I have no idea what the demo was. That was something I just made up a year ago. And he had been listening to it over and over and over. So I had to call my housekeeper in Malibu, have her dig through my cassettes, find the original demo, put it in a blaster, play it back, hold the phone up on it so we could record it in Miami and I could sit down and learn what I just made up off the cup so we could make it like the demo.
And that was Bill Simzik, right? Wasn't he the recording engineer on that? So, kind of. But the way you wrote it didn't have that loud big intro. It was more like you played it on When Hell Freezes Over tour, where you kind of had the flamenco Spanish intro to it, right?
That's correct, yeah.
And which is that the one you prefer? Obviously, you wrote that version, but
well, it was a challenge to do the acoustic version for Hell Freezes Over because we had conceived the whole thing and recorded electric guitars and Walsh and I playing solos on the end. And Joe and I aren't great flamenco guitar players, although I made a living playing in the Holiday Inn in Harvard Square, playing nylon string guitar in the restaurant there while people were having their wine and dinner and everything. So my chops were pretty good on nylon string. But at the very end of rehearsing for that Hell Freezes Over tour, everybody was recording these like unplugged versions of everything. So at the end of the rehearsal, Henley comes up and says, we need to have an acoustic version of Hotel. And he's looking at me like I'm just supposed to pull one out of the air. And I thought if we did it with steel string acoustic guitar, we're going to sound like a couple of flat picker and bluegrass players. That's just not the flavor of that song. So I took out a nylon string guitar and started working up a version of it. And I got Joe an acoustic guitar, a nylon string guitar, and he and I a couple of afternoons sat after rehearsal and just worked through that and came up with that arrangement. Now, we got on stage at Warner Brothers Studio, and we were going to film that show live twice so we could edit between the two shows. And we're at sound check, and the original acoustic version just started with the introduction like it did on the record. And then Henley says, this needs a special introduction. And I thought, well, what are you going to say? How are you going to introduce this? And he said, no, you need to make up a musical introduction. And I'm on the spot. We got live video cameras going. There's an orchestra there. So I said, okay, play this chord, then play that chord, play this chord, and then I'll just jam on it. So we started off. Both times I just made up these things, which turned out to be kind of the whole intro for the Hell Freezes Over acoustic version of it. And one of them turned out to be better than the other one and wound up on the record.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for writing that song and sharing that with us. That's amazing. I wish we could have our hour set back right now, but we're running out of time. But I want to thank John. And what have you got going on with are you going to get back with Justin Hayward? Are you guys going to do more Moody's projects? What do you see down in the future?
Well, I don't know what we'll do Moody Blues-wise. We've had an incredible time. And I want to thank everyone, who's been with the Moody Blues forever. Thank you. But I think we seem to be back in a hiatus that we did in the 70s, where we're just taking a break. I don't know what will happen in the future. We're all still friends. I want everyone to know that. Until we do something together as the Moody Blues, I just want to keep the Moody Blues music alive, because it's...
For sure, yeah, absolutely.
It's been part of my life, all my life. And, all of us talking about the hidden depths of 4 o'clock in the morning when you think, I wonder if anyone's ever going to listen to this record or enjoy this song, and that's when the doubts all come over. And but when at the end of the day, when we're here today on the Rock and Romance tour, what can I say? Thank you very much.
All right. Let's hear it for all of our superstars: John Lodge, Don Felder, Todd Rundgren, and of course Edgar Winter. Can we get a big group photo?